Hello everybody, I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be learning how to improve our academic research skills. This is going to be part one of a three-part series that will focus on how to write better academic essays. So part one is going to focus on how to acquire high-quality sources. Part two is going to focus on how to actually read and process those sources efficiently. And then part three is going to be how to actually implement those sources into a strong academic argument. So let's go ahead and get in there. All right, so I have written out steps to starting your research here for you. I've got 16 steps, but many of them overlap, so it's not quite as much work as it seems. I'm just going to walk you through that in this video real quickly. So, first part, make sure you read your assignment sheet carefully. Ask questions about anything that's unclear. This is something that many students often overlook quite a lot when writing any assignment, is they don't quite understand what the prompt is asking. So if anything is unclear, make sure you always ask your teacher, well, what do you mean by an academic source? What do you mean by a secondary source? You say that we should use the novel in this essay along with outside sources. How much should we discuss the novel in relationship to how much should we use outside sources? So just make sure that you clarify anything that might be a little bit vague in the assignment sheet, just so that you understand the expectations and that you're going to be able to succeed. If you have any questions about whether or not a source would be valid or whether or not you are approaching the assignment in the correct way, just vocalize this to the professor. Just let them know that you have this question and be polite about it. But, just be insistent that you understand what is expected in this essay. So I can't stress that enough. Whether it's a research essay or just a very common essay using only in-class materials, you always want to make sure that you understand the assignment sheet correctly. Okay, second one. Write down at least 3 broad sources that you may want to research. For this example that I'm going to use throughout this video, I'm just going to assume that it's an open-ended research paper. You can write about anything that you want. So make sure that you are, once again, doing part one of this and understand exactly what is asked. Sometimes professors will limit the kind of research that's available to you, but for this example, I'm just going to assume that you can write about anything that you want. So write down at least 3 broad topics that you might want to research. And then after you write those down, write down at least 3 subtopics for each one of those topics. So think of 3 really broad things and then sort of 3 categories that are similar or that are derivatives of those 3 broad topics. So I've got a sample research outline here for you. So let's say that my broad topics are media and culture, emerging technologies, and sports. So those are just the 3 things that came off the top of my head that could be interesting. These are very popular. Many students write about these topics every semester in my classes. So let's say with media and culture, you try to think of 3 subtopics. Let's go with body image, race, and esports. For emerging technologies, I wrote down synthetic biology, nanorobotics, and gene therapy. And then for sports, I wrote down sort of the discussion about concussions that have been going on in society, paying college athletes, always popular, and then the Olympic selection process. I feel like that might be something that students would be interested in this year, since we have the Olympics in Brazil, and there has been a lot of discussion about various cultural, political, and economic aspects surrounding the Olympics in Brazil. So I think that might be something that's germane for this semester. But anyways, so I have 3 main topics that I'm interested in and then 3 subtopics for each one of those. This gives me 9 choices for what I would like to write about. So this is a real easy way just to generate ideas. If you're just not really sure what you want to do, just do this. It only takes a few minutes and boom, there's 9 choices. Okay, I call this the 3x3 method with my students. It's real quick, it's real easy, it helps generate ideas that are often very useful for students. Next, write down a couple of questions that you would like to explore for each topic. Now, I only did this for one of them. I'm going to choose esports because there's a lot of video game enthusiasts that visit my YouTube channel probably, so I just went ahead and went with this one. This can actually be a legitimate research topic, so I just went ahead and chose that. So a few key questions that I would have about esports. How are video games changing our culture? Do video games improve or hinder society? How are video games distinct from other kinds of media? Why are women underrepresented as professional gamers? So you can write an endless stream of questions. But once you start writing questions down that you have about, a topic that you want to research, it helps you start to think in terms of kinds of solutions that you want to work towards. So that's why it's important just to write down as many questions as you can that are interesting to you. because questions often turn into strong arguments. That's the basis for most arguments, is asking a question and trying to find the answer. So you want to make sure that you don't just skip this. Don't just choose a topic and start researching. Ask yourself questions about what you're interested in. Why do you care about this topic? What are interesting aspects of this topic? That will help guide your research. Okay. And once you've asked yourself a few questions, you can kind of tell which direction you may want to go. Create a list of keywords and concepts and keep adding to this list. So don't think of a research outline that I'm creating here as something that you just write as part of just an assignment that your professor makes you do that's just really annoying that you're never going to use. The outline actually helps you tremendously in terms of organizing your ideas and guiding your research. So you always want to make sure that you keep adding to the outline. If you think of more questions or more subtopics that you might want to explore, always write those down. This doesn't have to be a process that finishes before you write your paper. You can just keep adding to this as you write your paper. And we'll go into that more in part 3. But keep your sample research outline, or it won't be a sample when you guys write it, guys and gals out there, when y'all write it. But be sure to keep your research outline. So create a list of keywords. All right, so the first keyword that I came up with was just esports. So that's it. These other ones are things that I learned as I did the research process. I've never researched esports. I just came at this fresh, just like you will probably approach your topic fresh when you're writing for your class. So I wanted to be fair. I just came at it fresh. It took me maybe 30 minutes to an hour to create this research outline for you. So it really shouldn't take you any longer than an hour to find some sources and create an outline just like this. Okay, so I just thought of esports. That was the only keyword I could think of right there. So now what you want to do, start doing some preliminary research. Search Amazon using your keywords to locate useful texts. Now, a lot of people think of Amazon as a place where you go to buy texts or other whatever people want to buy from Amazon. But it's also a great place to do your preliminary research. So let's take a look here. Now, I just typed in esports, and this is what came up. We find some useful books, some just random headsets and other things that aren't as germane to our topic. But the first one was interesting. So, Raising the Stakes, Esports, and Professionalization of Computer Gaming. And it's from MIT Press. This is a university press. You always want to go for university presses if you can. They have a lot more prestige and a lot more clout with an academic audience. We'll talk about why that's important in part 2 when we talk about how to actually read sources and process information. But just know that if you can find something that's published by a university press, that's really good news. Okay, then you get kind of the outline here. I read it over. It looks like, and it's really short. You guys can read this very quickly. It just basically talks about how esports developed historically into something that is a viable industry today. So it's got a lot of emphasis on history, but not any specific esports, not any specific theoretical aspects of video games. It's just simply a history of video games is how it appeared to me just reading this. Okay, and you can look at reviews. So, just skim the reviews like you would do with any other product. If it seems good, if people, think that it's a high quality book, then it might be worth reading. It has a small biography here, so you can know that she's a professor of comparative media studies at MIT. So that's a very, very credible source. This is not a casual video game enthusiast. This is someone who has lots of academic training with comparative media studies. Not that there's anything wrong with casual game enthusiasts. There's not. But this person's just going to have a lot more credibility in an academic setting. So this is really going to help the ethos of your source, which is just an academic way of saying its credibility. Okay, so this is one of the most important things. I think this is what I wrote down as the next step. So read the reviews and look at the inside feature. So let's go back over here. Click on this. Look inside. So the key component here, and most sources will give you this information, is you can see the table of contents. So you can know what a book is about before you ever decide to check it out, or before you even set foot in a library. So Playing for Keeps. Now sometimes they name it the chapters cryptic titles like this, Playing for Keeps. I don't really know what that means. But computer games as a professional sport, professionalizing players, growing industry, spectatorship, and fandom. So you can get a pretty good idea of the contents of this book just by reading the table of contents here in the look ahead. So very, very useful to figure out if you want to read the book or not. Sometimes they actually give you a chapter, they'll give you an introduction. So you can just kind of skim ahead using some of the techniques we'll talk about in part 2 of this series to figure out useful information really quickly from an introduction, an abstract, or a table of contents. But for now, just look it over. If it looks interesting, consider checking it out. All right. So pay close attention to the table of contents. Does it look useful? If the text is useful, write down the basic information and then copy paste the link. So do this on your sample or research outline here. Okay, so I just have good sources listed here. I just write down the name of the author. I write down the title of the book, and then I write down the date. This is very, very close to a proper MLA citation. You would need to add in the city and the publisher for it to be MLA, but this is going to be very, very easy. If you write down this information, you can translate this into an MLA citation in under 5 seconds. It's very, very quick. And it also just helps you find this later. So when you go through all these sources, and maybe you go out to dinner, or you work on that chemistry exam, or you go out with some friends, or whatever, now when you come back and try to do some more research, you already have this written down, so you're not going to be sitting there stuck thinking, what was I researching? Why was I researching it? What was the name of that really cool source that I found earlier? You're already going to know because you wrote it down, and all it takes is a few seconds to write this down. All of this information is right here. You have the title, you have the author, and it's going to have the publication date right here. So very, very easy. All you have to do is write it down. It'll help you remember it later. It also helps you write your works cited sheet later, or your bibliography. And then you just put the link of it right there as well. Then I just do one sentence, a couple of sentences, one or two, just to say, what is this book? What's it about? Just so that you remember, once again, because you shouldn't do all of your research 5 hours before the essay is due. At least try to do it a little bit ahead of time. Sorry about that beep there. I thought I put my phone on silent. I'll just throw it across the room. Yeah, so this is to help you out later because you have a busy life. You're not going to do this in one sitting. You shouldn't ideally do it in one sitting. You should do a little bit of research and then get up and go do something else for a little while. You don't have to sit down and do all of your research all at one time. So just write down real quick, what was this source? What was it about? So this book covers the history of competitive video games. That's simple. And then if you already kind of have an idea, be thinking in your mind, how can I use this source in my essay? If you can think of a way that you would use it, write that down too. Just say, this information might be useful for gathering broad information. I'm just going to say data. I wrote this out really quickly, so it's not the most glamorous writing in the world, but this information may be useful for gathering broad data to set the stage for my argument. So it's just good kind of historical data. I might use it for an introduction. I might use it for the first couple of paragraphs just to sort of set the stage for the video game industry. Just off the top of my head, that's how I could see this source being useful. So just put a sentence or two there. How could this source theoretically be useful in an argument that you might make? Just write it down. Once again, you might have a good idea. Hey, I can use this source to do this. But then if you go to sleep or you go out to dinner or whatever, you might forget that. So write it down so you remember it later. And then also look at customers who also bought this item. It has lots of really useful things. So one of these is reality is broken. That one sounded interesting to me. So I just clicked on that and it came up with this link, reality is broken. So now just do the same drill. Here it is. Now you can just read a quick description about it right here. Okay, this looks useful. Go down, look at the reviews. This is written by someone who has a PhD and designs video games. So pretty good credibility. This one doesn't look like the reviews are quite as strong, but they're still pretty good. So this is still something that I would want to look into probably. So same drill, just click on it. Table of contents, what exactly is a game, the rise of happiness, more satisfying work, fun and failure. So she has a lot more chapters. This book feels like it would be a bit longer. But keep in mind, and we'll discuss this a lot in part 2, you don't have to read all of an academic book. Just because you can check out a 300-page book doesn't mean you have to read all 300 pages. Most professors do not expect that. They expect you to just be able to come up with useful information out of a source and connect it with your own argument. So you might only read, you might only read part 2, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So this might only be 30 pages long. You might only read parts 7 and 8 if they're useful. You don't have to read all of an academic book. They're often designed to be read like a buffet, where you find useful information, useful chapters, use that in your argument, and then you don't have to use the rest of it. It's not like a novel where if you jump in right in the middle, then it's not going to make any sense. Academic books are often written for you to jump around. They try to help you out with their headings and the way they structure it. So we'll talk about that more in part 2. But don't be intimidated by large books. You can check them out. You can still make them useful, even if you don't have time to read 300 pages. Okay, so that's another useful book, and you just keep doing that with all of your sources. Just find it, useful books. Look at your, like I said, the also bought here. Very useful. Okay, then just do a couple sentences. Also, look at the bibliography for sources. So not all sources will let you access the bibliography, but some of them will. So I found this one, then I found this one, and then I found another source here. Just by going along that also bot chain. This one says Persuasive Games, the Expressive Power of Video Games, MIT Press again. And this one looks a lot more theoretical. So this is medium, a persuasive medium, goes through, uses words like rhetoric, thanks to their basic representation, procedurality. So yeah, this would be a good technical theoretical work if you need a more academic intellectual foundation for what your argument's going to be. But if we look here, we see that he has 3 headings, so politics, advertising, learning, and he has a bibliography on page 401. So I know this one has a bibliography because I checked it. So what you can do, go all the way down here. That's the index, a little too far. We'll scroll up a little bit here. I can just stop here. I don't have to scroll all the way up. This is what every page is going to look like for quite a while. So he cites every single one of his sources. And a good academic work will probably have about 100 sources. Obviously, you don't have to read all of them, but just skim through. Just look at this. This is a treasure trove of information. Because if you can find a book that's been published relatively recently, 2010 is a bit old for this topic, but it still could be useful. Just flip through and just see if something looks like it could be interesting here. So if we just say, let's see, the political machine, Virtual Magic Kingdom, and then he's citing Pulp Fiction and some other stuff, and then he has articles cited, so Edward Thorndike, Educational Psychology, The Psychology of Learning. That's from 1913, so that's a bit of an old source, but you guys get the drift of what I'm saying here. You can just flip through these sources, and if some of them look interesting, then you can go look up those sources also. So this is another great way to find sources that you might not otherwise be able to find. You just flip through and just find things that seem like they could be of interest to you. So the bibliography is a wonderful way to find extra sources. Now, will I read most of these sources? Probably not. But even if I just find, 1 or 2 sources in here that's really interesting, I may not be able to find those sources in any other readily available way because I don't quite know what I'm doing yet. I'm still in the preliminary stages. So I'm not going to know the names of lots of the really prominent authors in this field. I'm not going to know the names of foundational works that all kinds of other people cite. So this helps you find those names. So it's very useful, like Mindstorms, Children, Computers, and Powerful Ideas. Okay, we'll move on. But just look at the bibliography. Very, very, very helpful if you can find that. Especially, like I said, with a very new source. So anything that's been published in the last 5 years or so, very, very helpful. Okay, and then I just sum this up. Now, one thing to note about this. This book explores how video games create a new form of rhetoric that this guy describes as procedural rhetoric. So that was a very interesting term. I'd never heard that before. So what I did is I went ahead and added it to my keywords here. And then the next part, I believe, also bought recording keywords, use Wikipedia. Now, I know that lots of academics will say, don't ever use Wikipedia. It's terrible. You'll fail if you use Wikipedia in a paper. And Wikipedia is not great as a final destination for your sources. So that means that you should not cite Wikipedia directly in your essay. And the reason is it's collaborative. So you don't know who the author is and you can't substantiate a lot of the claims. We'll talk about why that's important in part 2 a little bit more when we talk about the importance of credibility and sources. But just trust me, you can't use Wikipedia as a final source. It's not gonna work in academic writing. But you can use Wikipedia to help you find some preliminary research. So let's say that I go ahead and I found that interesting. So procedural rhetoric was the term. Let's go ahead and click on here. Look for that in Wikipedia. Okay, look, a nice succinct article. So I don't know exactly what that term is. So I can just look. Okay, here it is. It mentions the guy in his book that I found. So we know there's a connection there. And then it name drops other people. So it mentions Gonzalo Frasca. It also mentions Janet Murray, her definition of procedural rhetoric from Hamlet on the holodeck. Oh, that sounds interesting. So what's that? We can go Amazon, look it up. Hamlet on the holodeck. Here it is. It's a little bit older. I don't see the date offhand, but I think it was 1998 when I looked. So it's a little bit older, but it could also be used with historical sources. That one source that I mentioned before, where it sort of sets the stage for how video game culture emerged. So I went ahead and wrote that in my sample research. So I wrote it down here. Further reading. So it's a bit old. I'm not sure if I would use it directly in my source or in my academic essay, but I might. And then I just say this text establishes the theoretical foundation for what Ian Bogost will later develop into his notion of procedural rhetoric. So now I could maybe combine this with the first source that I mentioned, Raising the Stakes, and just talk about how computer gaming culture arose in the 90s for esports. So I could combine it with another source, even though it's a little bit old. So if you find useful names or sources, just click on them. Look for them on Amazon. See what happens. Okay, so Gonzalo Frasca. Let's click on this. Okay, so his major work was Simulation, Narrative, and Introduction to Ludology. Well, what is ludology? I don't know what that is, so it seems like an interesting keyword. So I wrote it down. Ludology. And simulation rhetoric is what Frasca had here. So we see it drops that name in here somewhere. It talks about simulation rhetoric. I just kind of skimmed over this a little bit. So these are just ways that you can expand your search. And this didn't take very long. All I had to do was start typing in interesting keywords that I saw off of Amazon from looking at previews of these books. And now, all of a sudden, if you look in under an hour, I have 3 pretty good solid sources. I have 2 secondary sources where I'm not sure if they'll work, but they look pretty good. So I've found 5 sources in an hour that I could go research. So that's very, very useful. Also built up my vocabulary a little bit, learned some new technical words that I could look up on Amazon, or on Wikipedia rather. And you can just keep clicking on these things. This is another book from 1961. That's old, but I could maybe use that. Influence and responses. And you can always click on the references down at the bottom. So you might actually be able to find good sources at the bottom of Wikipedia. So all you have to do is just click on, I haven't clicked on this. I don't know what this is going to give me, but I'm just going to click on it and see where it goes. So this is a blog, so probably not the best source. You don't always get good sources down here, but you might. So we found simulation versus narrative, introduction to ludology. There's a debate of some sort. The year in gaming, simulation, introduction to ludology again. So you don't always find great references, but sometimes you do. And then there's a bibliography here, mentions all of Frasca's works he's ever published. So yeah, always look at the references and bibliography at the bottom. You can look at external links too. So once again, Wikipedia is not a good final destination for your research, but it can be very strong for finding keywords, finding sources, finding other authors of interest. And then you can go look them up on Amazon or Google them or do whatever to find out more about them. So don't be scared of Wikipedia. Even though you shouldn't use it as a final destination, it is a fantastic research for finding some preliminary ideas. So don't let any professor scare you off from that. Just don't cite it. Like, I wouldn't just cite this as a source talking about Frasca. I would go find his work and then cite the work as the source. Okay. Finally, and we're going to wrap up this video here. I don't want to take too long on it, but I do want to be thorough and I do want to be helpful. So check your library resources for text that you want. Don't forget library exchanges. So most library resources will look something like this. This is the Ohio Link Library Catalog. Now, I already looked, and this book that I'm going to type in doesn't appear. My library doesn't have it, but there is a library exchange program between nearby states, and almost all major universities have access to this. So just try this out. So let's look here. So persuasive games, the expressive power of video games. So just find 3 keywords here. So persuasive games, expressive. All right. You're just looking for words. Anytime you type in a search engine for something, you're looking for words that are unique that wouldn't be in other titles, and you just string them together like that. Persuasive games, expressive. Okay, so we've got this. And now you can just look here. It'll tell you all the table of contents. Now, once again, your library may look slightly different, but I assume that most libraries have something that looks very similar to this. You can go to a quick summary, and then you can have it delivered to your library. So just because your library doesn't physically have the book, you can often get it. And once again, I teach at a major university in the United States, so other countries may not have access to this, but the principles are the same. You just go look it up using a search like that after you've already found, things that you want to research on Amazon. So this is not the place to find books because you're not going to get tons of previews here. So if I just type, actually you might be able to find some books. So the first thing that shows up here is actually Raising the Stakes also, interestingly enough. But that's the only thing that shows up. And you don't get all of those. So College Disrupted. Okay, so a lot of this is not about esports, if you notice. Like, almost none of it is. It's just this one thing here. So if I click on this, it'll tell me how to get that book. But it doesn't let me look inside. It doesn't let me look at the bibliography. This one actually doesn't. I guess it does give you the table of contents here. It doesn't give you reviews. It doesn't let you know anything about the author, and it doesn't give you the people who bought this also bought. So it doesn't give you suggestions for further books. So that's why you shouldn't look on your library's website for books. That is your final destination. Once you find books that you want, using Amazon and Wikipedia to find good keywords and find lots of high-quality sources, then you go order it from your library. So your library needs to be the end destination, but not the place where you actually search, because this is just so much better for searching. It gives you so much more information, so many more related sources. It's just way, way better. And I think that's a common mistake. And a lot of professors won't say that to students. They won't say, go look on Amazon and read reviews and look at the inside of the book and look at related purchases. People won't say that. They'll say, go to the library and find some sources. And a lot of students will just scratch their head and say, well, how do I know what I'm looking for? So I hope this is very helpful. The final information that I have here for you is beware of JSTOR and other databases. We'll talk about this more in part 2. I want to wrap this up though, but if I just type in video game culture, I get 11,000 results into JSTOR or another database. There's hundreds and hundreds of databases out there, and sometimes professors will say, well, go look in the database, go look at something, that'll help you find some academic articles. Well, JSTOR is the most popular one, and if you look at this can be very intimidating because you don't, it's hard to understand what's going on. Also, a lot of this is very, very specific. So look at this. Let's just click on this one, for example. Playing the game of literature, Ready Player One, the ludic novel, and the geeky canon of white masculinity. So we click on this. Read the abstracts. This will tell you, this is kind of like what the book or what the article is going to be about. So it says, this text illustrates the anxieties and uncertainties of embodiment and identity in the digital age by constructing a pop, quote, culture, or a pop culture, quote, canon of text that participates in video game culture, that all participants in video game culture must know, blah, blah, blah. And then you taught over here is also in quotes. So anytime you start seeing things in quotes like that, and anytime you start seeing, things like white maleness, and gender identities and embodiment, this is getting deep into academic theories. This is going to be a highly theoretical work. I haven't downloaded this yet, but my usual instinct is that works like that are a bit too dry, too dense, just a bit overkill for most undergraduates who are trying to write academic works. It's not that undergraduates can't read this, but it's just that it's way too specific. It just requires too much dedication. It's just unreasonable to expect, freshmen, sophomores, even seniors to read something like this. So if you're interested, by all means, come here and look, find some good articles. But this is not a great place to start your research because it's going to be too intimidating. It's going to be way too specific. You're not going to understand, okay, I read this, but what can I contribute to this conversation? Where can I place my argument? And we'll talk about what that means in part 3, how to place yourself with your sources. But just take my advice. Don't start with the databases. Start with Amazon. Start with broad ideas. Start with Wikipedia. Use the techniques that I mentioned here. And I'll link this also in the YouTube description. So if you want to see these tips, you can access them anytime that you want. I'll also link my sample research outline here. But start with this. Start with these easy tips first. And then once you find a bunch of other broad sources and you kind of figure out what you want to do with your argument, what's going to be interesting, where you're going with your argument, then start thinking about adding an article or two if you want. You don't have to add articles. I'll be honest, I'm in my 5th year of PhD right now. This is going to be my 7th year of graduate studies. I almost never use JSTOR. I always use books because they're much more accessible and they just have a higher ethos. They're just better for a ton of reasons, and we'll talk about that in part 2. But you should use books. They're faster, they're more efficient, often they're easier to understand, they're more applicable to a greater variety of arguments. There's a ton of reasons you want to use books over articles, but we'll talk about that in part 2. We need to go ahead and wrap this up. I think this is probably taking a bit longer than I wanted, but I just wanted to be thorough, as I said. So these are my tips for helping you gain some preliminary research. If you found this useful, please share this with a friend. I would like to get this out to as many people as possible because I don't think that many students understand how to do academic research in an efficient way. I think that academic research sounds like something that's just very arcane, very time-consuming, very challenging, and just very intimidating because a lot of professors just won't explain how to do academic research efficiently to students. They'll just say something like, go to the library or find sources or you're on your own. And I think the assumption is that students should just know how to do this or should just magically be able to do this. When in fact, this just isn't taught a lot in high school. It's not the students' fault that they don't know how to do this kind of research because they have to spend way too much time doing a standardized test in high school. They don't have time to figure out even what they want to argue. There's so many students that I have that come in and they're just like, well, I don't know what to write about. And I'm like, well, what do you enjoy? And they just look at me like I'm crazy because no one's ever asked them what they enjoy, what they want to research, what they want to write about. They've always been told what to think. They've been told what to enjoy. They've been told how to pass these tests. And so even just facing, a situation where you can choose your own topic is already overwhelming to students. And now, a lot of classes just expect them to go and be able to magically find good sources and know exactly how to narrow down topics and exactly how to find useful sources. And it's not a magical thing. Like, you have to practice this. You have to be taught how to do this. Yes, everybody uses Amazon. Yes, most people use Wikipedia, but that doesn't mean that people know how to use it in these ways that I described. And it seems really simple, but it's not. People just don't think about it in that way. And so I hope this is very useful. So please share this with other students, with other teachers as well. If you think they might want to show this video in their class, or at least teach some of the ideas that I'm teaching here, by all means, share it with everybody. I want everybody to do very well in academia, everyone to write really awesome research essays, everyone to learn how to think critically, research things they enjoy, and just become better, more happy, more fulfilled citizens. Like, that's my ultimate goal. That's why I got into education. So, be sure to share this with anyone that might like it. If you enjoy this content, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm still a relatively small channel, and so every single like and subscribe makes a huge difference in how YouTube prioritizes my searching. So if you enjoy the content, please, just one click can help bring even more students in here to help them succeed and just feel more comfortable and just have a more fulfilling academic life if they just learn how to write research papers better. And that's really the goal. So tell people, like, subscribe if you like the content. I appreciate it a ton, and so do the students who will also be benefiting from coming and finding this kind of video, because this just doesn't exist a lot on YouTube. And I know because I tried to find a source about academic research on YouTube, and I had to find something from 2007 that was like monotone and a PowerPoint slide that just didn't really have a lot of useful information in it. But I had to have something because I didn't just want to sit up and just lecture for 2 weeks about how to write a research essay. I wanted to have a different voice. I wanted to have some visuals. And you just can't find it. It's so hard to find. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to fill that gap. I'm trying to help people understand how to research better in what I hope is an accessible way, using real examples, showing you hands-on, clicking through these different mechanisms of research. So I'm really trying to make it not necessarily entertaining. I hope it's kind of entertaining. I don't fool myself into thinking this is going to be super entertaining, but at least tolerable and at least interesting, and most importantly, very helpful. So Once again, if you enjoy this content, just let people know, either through like, subscribe, or just telling other people about it. But thank you very much. That's going to be it for this episode. I hope you learned a lot. And don't forget to come back. We're going to have a part 2 and a part 3 where we go over how to read and process academic sources well. And then part 3 is how to actually implement research into your own academic argument to write a very successful and strong argument. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.